In this video, I want to show you how to do CSS only parallax. So there are lots of different ways to do parallax on your website, most of them involving JavaScript, and it all just depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your parallax. I like this CSS only parallax solution because it's pretty good performance-wise, but it doesn't have as much control as some of the JavaScript ones. So if you look in the written tutorial, I'll have some links for different JavaScript parallax stuff, but this is a CSS only parallax. So this technique relies on 3D transformations. Specifically, it relies on something called Preserve 3D, which allows us to orient the elements in three-dimensional space and have some things in behind and have them in perspective, basically. So let's start by setting up our HTML here. So I'll create an element. Maybe this is going to be in our header or something, but let's create a div, the class equal to parallax group, like this. And in here, I'll have an image, like this. And let's put a class on this one. Let's call it back because it's going to be the thing in the back. And then let's create another div in here. Maybe this will be our header. Let's give it a class of front. This will be the content in front of that element. So the back will sort of move more slowly than the stuff in the front. So let's put an H1 in here, like that. So this is a general setup for how we can do this parallax. Now what we want to do is go into our CSS and tweak a few things. But before I do that, I'm just going to refresh it to make sure it works. All right, there we go. So let's go into our CSS and let's first target body and get rid of the margin that is there, like that. And then I'm going to target this image and give it a width of 100% so it scales to fit the browser. There we go. Now what we want to do is change the browser scrolling mechanism. The only way to get this to work is use a CSS property called perspective. But for some reason, it doesn't work on the HTML element if the HTML element is the thing that's being scrolled, probably because the HTML element has a fixed height. So what we want to do to start is turn off the scroll bars from the HTML element because that's where they are by default, and instead add them onto the body element. So we'll go overflow Y auto, which will turn on scroll bars if they're required, and we'll write overflow X hidden because we don't want any horizontal scroll bars. And to make sure that we maintain a good scrolling performance on iOS devices, we should add WebKit overflow scrolling touch. So this will allow the scrolling to have nice performance on mobile devices. If we go and refresh now, nothing should have changed, but well, you should be able to scroll if I did this properly. Maybe we need a height on this. Yes, 100 VH. All right, there we go. So I had overflow hidden, or overflow Y hidden on the body or auto. So I needed to make the body scale up to the height of the window. So there we go. We've got our scrolling changed now so that it's scrolling the body element instead of the HTML element. Now what we want to do is add a little bit of perspective to our element. So on here, we're going to type perspective, and I'm going to do 1px. Now we will need some vendor prefixes for this, so we'll just do WebKit perspective. And if we go and refresh, nothing should change, but that's okay. That's going to allow some elements to travel more slowly or more quickly than other elements. And we're just about ready to set up. So let's target parallax group, and we want to use the transform style preserve 3D property here, like this. Again, we're going to need some vendor prefixes for this, like that. So that will still not do anything because we haven't targeted the actual HTML elements yet that we want to parallax. And that's where these other classes come in, so back and front. So let's start with back. We're going to target back, and I want it to be a little bit slower. So in order to make it a little bit slower, I have to move it back in three-dimensional space. So I'm going to use transform to do that. And we're going to specifically translate the Z property. And we're just going to move it back -1 pixel like this. So now if I go to my browser and refresh, you can see, well, it's not quite doing anything yet. And that's because I chose X instead of Z. Okay, here we go. There, so now you can see, if you look closely at my text down here, you can see the image is scrolling at a different speed than the text. So we've achieved parallax here using Translate Z. Of course, we will need some vendor prefixes on this, so I'm going to put WebKit in here right away, like that. And there you go, we can see we have a little bit of parallax going on. Now, there's some math involved here. I linked to a CSS tricks article that covers all the math, but really we need to scale this image back up. It's kind of half the size it used to be, so we're going to add scale in here of 2 to both of these to scale it back up to the size it was before, like that, and there we go. Okay, so let's go and style the front now. It doesn't really need any parallax stuff on it, but I'm going to give it a background color here of like a gray color and maybe some really big padding like 14M and 1M like that to get it into place. You saw it flash in behind there. There it is right there. So it needs to come to the front really. It's kind of in behind right now, so we need it to come to the front. So let's do position relative on it. And we'll give it a Z index of 2 to make sure it's in the front, like that. There. So now you can see it's coming to the front, and we have a simple parallax effect here. There's a couple other things we may want to adjust. You'll notice if we scale this, it's not super responsive. So this thing isn't actually touching the top here. So the back element, we also want to make it position relative. And we need to change its top coordinate. Now there's quite a bit of math involved in this. I'm just going to dump the formula in here. You can check out the CSS tricks article if you're interested in what all this is doing. So the only thing, this is the formula here, 100 viewport height minus something, which we need to put in there, divided by 4 all times -2. What we need in here, though, is the aspect ratio for the image. So I'm going to go here and, oh, my image isn't giving me a dimension here. Let's go figure out what the dimensions are for my image. I suppose it would be quicker with developer tools. So the image is 2560 by 1400. So 1440 divided by 2560, which gives me 56.25. So that's the number I have to put in here. 56.25 VW, like that. And that will fix the responsiveness. So we're pushing it up a little bit on the screen so that it fits on different screen sizes like that. All right, so there we go. There is a very simple parallax for our website. Now, we could add another element in here. The trick to controlling the speed of this is the translate Z of -1 pixel. If we wanted another element to go slightly different speed, like maybe, let's just put an H2 for now, like this. In here, we could target the H2 and give it a, I'll just copy these 2 lines like that. So if we wanted to move it to move a little bit faster than the background, but a little bit still slower, we could just change this from -1 to -0.5 as an example. 0.5 like that. Scale, well, it doesn't really need to be there, but if we were to add it, it would be 1.5 instead. 1.5. Now if we go and refresh, the text you can see right here is moving a little bit faster, but a little bit slower. We probably also want this to be position absolute, maybe a top of, I don't know, 10M, width of 100%, and text align center, maybe a color like that. So now you can see we have parallax going on here between the image and the text and the content underneath. So using these properties, the translate Z along with preserve 3D and perspective, we can create sort of a CSS effect or a parallax effect using just CSS. As a little extra to the video, I realized that I should probably mention this little white space right here. And we wouldn't normally see that if this wasn't an image. If this was a div or something else that we were parallaxing with, then we wouldn't see that. But if you remember, images always seem to have that little bit of white space on the bottom of them. So if we do display block on our image here, we could either put it here or put it up on the image right here. That little space will disappear because that space no longer exists in the image anymore. So we are getting rid of that little bit of white space at the bottom.